Star Trek, The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Number 5, Atlantis Station, Chapter 5. To no one's surprise, Ven took the pilot's seat when the cadets boarded the Aqua Shuttle. Geordi paused in the door, thinking how much he needed the points for piloting the ship. Ven had no right to keep him from doing that part of his assignment. After this morning's close escape, though, the other cadets would support Ven. Geordi knew he could fly the shuttle, but the others would think he was still too rattled. He would be better off waiting until they left the lower station before he asked for his turn. That decided, Geordi headed aft, choosing the seat beside the rear viewport. Amril and Amray were in their seats ahead of him, while Todd and Lissa were on the other side of the aisle. To Geordi's surprise, Leilani took the co-pilot seat. Tavarian came aft, leaving Yoshi in the fold-out seat behind the flight officers. After watching Tavarian's stiff movements, Geordi concentrated on his pad. The Vulcan clearly believed she was a better co-pilot than Leilani. "Prepare for departure," Leilani said. Geordi checked the buckle on his harness to make sure it was secure. Ven wasted no time in taking the shuttle up. He made a full power lift-off that drove Geordi deep in his seat. The shuttle's nose pitched sharply upward, and Geordi felt like he was sitting on the side of a steep mountain. They reached the top of their arc. Ven tipped the shuttle downward, pointing it toward the ocean's surface. In the brief moment before the computer adjusted for the change, they were in free fall. Geordi felt his stomach lurch, and he fought to keep his lunch down. "Do you have to be so dramatic?" Lissa asked. She looked pale, and Geordi guessed her stomach felt like his. "I calculated this as the optimum course for entering the ocean," Ven said without taking his eyes off the controls. The shuttle's engines whined as Ven increased power. Geordi shook his head, not bothering to say anything. He'd calculated this problem a dozen ways, and Ven's solution wasn't close to the best answer. The Andorian was hot-dogging, showing off to impress Leilani. Considering how the computer graded their piloting, it was a foolish thing to do. A routine dive would score far higher. Fountains of spray erupted as the shuttle's nose hit the water. The entry was smooth. The Aqua Shuttle slowed quickly as it switched to underwater operations mode. Gaudy fish and floating seaweed flashed past the viewport, but they were gone almost as soon as Geordi spotted them. A glance around the cabin showed him that his classmates were as fascinated with the underwater view as he was. Within seconds, they were below the photic zone, the layer of the ocean that the sun's light could penetrate. Blackness, permanent night closed around the Aqua Shuttle, and Geordi shivered. The water outside was barely above freezing. The deeper they went, and the closer they got to the lower station, the more icy water there was above them. If anything went wrong, they were a long way from safety. He shivered again, thinking how like, yet how unlike, the deep oceans in outer space were. Both were dark. Space filled the universe with an infinite night, speckled with stardust. But the black water outside his viewport could not have been more featureless if he had removed his visor. Both were cold, although the emptiness of space was colder, and neither place contained air that humanoids could breathe. The vacuum of space could cause the air to be pushed from an unprotected person's lungs as quickly as the crushing pressure of the deep oceans could force the water in. He touched his waist pouch, reassuring himself that his rebreather was there. In an emergency, the unit would provide him with breathable air for several hours. "I hope the batteries are fully charged," he thought. He also hoped he wouldn't need to use the device. A faint green light flickered outside the window and disappeared behind them. For a moment, Geordi thought he had imagined it. A phosphorescent fish. Actually, bioluminescent, Lissa. Lissa pointed out the window. "Did you see it, Todd?" Bioluminescent. Todd leaned across her, trying to see out the window. The absolute blackness had returned. "It's gone," he said, settling back into his seat. "They aren't usually found around here." "That species does not favor habitats this near to the surface," Deverian said. "There is too much competition for food." "I suppose you know exactly which type of fish that was." Todd glared at the Vulcan. "Even if you didn't see it, even if you didn't see it either. My files list 25 species of bioluminescent fish that are sometimes found in life zones similar to the one we are passing through. Of those 25, probabilities favor—" "You mean you're guessing?" Todd laughed, a sound that held very little humor. "I can do that too." Blood rushed to Tavarian's face. Geordi didn't think the others could tell that she experienced any emotions, but his visor showed him the heat that surged to her face. "That confirms our theory." Amory gave her clone sister a significant look. Amaryl nodded. "The impending eruption is causing the deep water organisms to abandon their habitats. There is a 1.5% chance that, at any given time, organisms from a deeper life zone will be found in shallower water." Tavarian's hand tightened around her pad. "The life zones in this area are deeper because of the warm surface temperatures." Amory acted like she hadn't heard Tavarian, although her words contradicted the Vulcan statement. "That variety of fish normally lives below the level of the lower station," Amaryl added. "If this shuttle had the proper sensors, we could monitor the migrations." Amory glanced toward the front of the shuttle. Venon's antennae were swiveled as far forward as he could get them. The Andorian was trying to ignore the conversation, Geordi decided. Clearly, he still didn't want to hear any suggestion that the volcano might erupt. That Leilani didn't say anything either must mean that the shuttle wasn't equipped with the special sensors needed for detailed underwater research. "And chart the movements to show when the volcano will explode." Amaryl finished her sister's sentence, matching tone and meter perfectly. Tavarian turned toward the clones. Her Vulcan mask was firmly in place. "You do not have sufficient information to support your conclusions. It is not logical for you to continue to ignore that fact." Amaryl and Amory looked at each other, then began giggling. Amory tried to say something, and both girls laughed harder. Soon tears were streaming down their cheeks. "Not," Amory said, gasping for breath between her giggles, "logical." Amaryl wrapped her arms around her stomach. Both girls howled even louder. "I fail to see the humor in the situation." Tavarian looked from Amaryl to Amory. One of her eyebrows had disappeared into her bangs. The giggling died down, replaced by Amaryl's and Amory's gasps for breath. Finally, both were able to talk. Amory tugged her hand through her dark ponytail. "It's not logical for us to believe that the volcano is going to erupt because you disagree with our analysis, but the same reasoning makes it equally illogical for you to believe an analysis that neither of us supports." "My analysis is based purely on logic." Tavarian's face was a rigid mask. "Each of the factors that are used to predict eruptions is within the normal range. If the volcano is behaving normally, it will not erupt." Geordi frowned, trying to find the flaw in Tavarian's argument. Volcanoes were formed by eruptions. That meant eruptions were as normal as the quiet periods between them. Amaryl shook her head patiently. "We agree that each individual reading falls within the normal range for the periods between eruptions, but every reading for every instrument is on the high end of the range. Everything suggests—" The two girls glanced at each other and finished the sentence in unison. "That the volcano is getting ready to blow up big time." Tavarian lifted one eyebrow. "Your conclusion is totally illogical. The sum cannot be greater than the numbers added to obtain it." Geordi called up his report. Comparing his data with the historical records, he was surprised to find that Tavarian was right. Each of the present readings was matched by similar readings taken when the volcano had not erupted. With nothing else to do until they got to the lower station, Geordi began cross-checking the data. Beep, boop, beep, beep, boop, 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 beep, beep. The research was so absorbing that he lost track of everything but what he was reading on his pad. His classmates' conversations and the thrum of the engines faded into the background. Within 10 minutes, he was more convinced than ever that he was right about a pending eruption. To prove it, he would need to check every record in the computer. However, the pattern he found was consistent. When only one type of sensor reading was high, nothing happened. When all the readings were high, the volcano erupted. It wasn't a question of if the volcano was going to erupt, he realized. It was a question of when. He leaned back in his seat thinking. He was just a first-year cadet, not even a science specialist. There were 75 professional scientists working on Isla del Fuego. Most of them knew more about the volcano than he did. If the pattern he had found was real, they should have noticed it. Was the pattern real? Yes, Geordi decided. He was convinced that the volcano was going to erupt soon. However, in geologic terms, soon was a tricky word. For a planet, time was measured in thousands or millions and billions of years. Soon could be 5 minutes or 5 decades from now. Leilani, did the geologists know when the volcano was going to erupt? He asked. She looked over her shoulder at him. That's a major topic of research here. Isla del Fuego is not as predictable as the Hawaiian volcanoes. Our geologists think their models are accurate to within a day. But we haven't had an eruption in 20 years. It's hard to check their predictions without any data. Thanks. Suddenly, Geordi felt much better. Even if the volcano was going to erupt, he didn't need to worry about it ruining their field trip. The experts had spent years studying the volcano. They would have ordered the cadets back to the academy if they thought something would happen this afternoon. Even so, Geordi was glad when he saw the first soft glow from the lower station's marker beacons. Sitting gave him too much time to think and to worry. The lower station was a superb example of Federation engineering. He couldn't wait to explore it. Chapter 6. The glow from the beacon grew brighter. Leilani turned to Ven. I'm taking over. I am in command of this vessel, Andorian replied. I refuse to let an unqualified person endanger our lives. Exactly. Leilani gave him a tight smile. You've never docked a shuttle underwater, not even in the simulator. Geordi grinned. It was good to see someone stand up to Ven. Underwater dockings weren't as easy as they looked. He'd practiced in the simulator, but had missed more times than he had succeeded. Luckily, Leilani had checked Ven's practice log. Ven turned to his classmates for support. Geordi quickly looked out the window. He didn't want an inexperienced pilot trying to dock the Aqua Shuttle. No one else stood up for Ven either. When he realized his classmates weren't going to help, Ven switched the controls to standby and took over the co-pilot's duties. Leilani brought her command functions online. Cadet Ven, read off the approach distances, she ordered. 200 meters, Ven read from the screen. 150 meters, 125, 100. Leilani reduced the power to the engines. Friction from the water slowed the shuttle faster than Geordi expected. Piloting underwater was more complicated than flying in the air or in space. Geordi remembered why he had found the underwater simulator sessions so difficult. Ven continued to read off the distances, freeing Leilani to adjust for the unpredictable cross-currents near the station. The computer could have reported the numbers. Having Ven read them showed him that the underwater approach wasn't as simple as he had assumed. The shuttle coasted alongside the station. The rectangular airlock, surrounded by bright beacons, jutted out from the dome's smooth surface. Leilani tapped the port thrusters. The shuttle scooted sideways and bumped against the magnetic grapples with just enough force to engage the clamps and the airlock seals. A low mechanical throbbing shook the shuttle, followed by the splash and slosh of water outside the door. Fascinated, Geordi listened as the water splashed lower and lower on the door. Does it always take this long? Lissa's freckles stood out against her pale skin. She ruffled a hand through her coppery hair. Geordi tried to decide whether she had asked the question from impatience or nerves. This model of pump drains the water in the airlock while simultaneously adjusting the air pressure in the shuttle to match that of the station. Shortly, our ears will, I believe the expression is, pop. I don't know. I think actually there'd be a squeeze, pressure-wise, but Tavarian's voice sounded strained. In a way, Geordi understood her reaction. Vulcan was a desert planet, and it had no deep ocean research posts like Atlantis Station. Geordi touched his rebreather again to remind himself that they did have backup systems for emergencies. As he did, he wondered why he felt so uneasy. He'd spent most of his life on Starfleet vessels or on space stations, following his parents from one assignment to another. If something went wrong in deep space, rescue was a lot farther away than it was here. Besides, he told himself, nothing can possibly go wrong. The lower dome of Atlantis Station was built to survive its environment. They were as safe here as they would be on the island above. Finally, the pumps finished draining the airlock. At the same time, Geordi's ears popped. Around him, the other cadets swallowed to adjust the pressure in their ears. Okay, that's for a squeeze. See, the ears don't pop when the pressure's increased. They squeeze. The shuttle's door slid open, letting in a gust of damp, cold air. It smelled of iodine and scorched lubricant. Mixed with that was the flat, faintly metallic odor of air held too long in storage tanks. The inner door slid open, letting them into the station. The narrow corridor curved in either direction. The air smelled much better here, Geordi thought, although it still seemed flat and metallic. Welcome to Neptune's locker. That's what the people who work here call this undersea dome. Leilani's voice was almost an octave higher than it had been. Lissa giggled at the change in Leilani's voice. The sound was high-pitched, like the voices in some old cartoons Geordi had once seen. Once started, Lissa couldn't stop. The laughter was contagious, and everyone but Tavarian joined it. I'm sorry. I fail to see what you find so amusing. Tavarian's expression was faintly alarmed. At this depth, the station must use a helium-oxygen atmosphere. That is to prevent people from becoming intoxicated from nitrogen in the bloodstream. Geordi tried to stop laughing long enough to explain. Everyone sounds so different. He started giggling again. Studying how helium altered sounds was completely different from hearing your own voice suddenly change to soprano. He'd expected the change, but he couldn't help laughing at how silly he sounded.
It's all right,
Leilani said.
everyone has the same reaction the first time. We maintain surface pressure and atmosphere in the shuttle as we come down. You don't have to worry about having rapture of the deep.
Tavarian pulled her eyebrows together in a look of fierce concentration.
What about the nitrogen we were breathing?
Leilani's smile showed that she'd been expecting the question.
That's why we keep the shuttle at surface pressure. Studies show that nitrogen is forced from your bloodstream within minutes because of the greater air pressure here in the station. When we return to the surface, we'll take about 4 times as long as we did coming down. That lets us gradually reduce the pressure in the shuttle's cabin. We'll also change the air mix back to surface normal as we go up.
Tavarian shook her head.
I still do not understand why everyone is laughing. It is not logical.
She really doesn't understand our humor, Geordi thought. It was hard to realize how differently Vulcans thought. He tried to control his laughter.
That's why we think it's funny, because it isn't logical.
She shook her head, struggling with the idea. Geordi tried to find a better way to tell her why they were laughing. It wasn't easy. When you had to explain a joke, it wasn't as funny as when you heard it the first time. In fact, it wasn't a joke at all. Leilani glanced at her pad.
We've got a full schedule this afternoon. If you're ready, we'll get started.
She started down the corridor. Geordi followed her, and the other cadets fell in with him. He couldn't wait to see what their next project would be. Leilani led them along the corridor. It followed the outer rim of the station, curving ahead and behind them. Thick viewports, as dark as the ocean beyond, looked outward. Opposite them, sliding doors led to the interior of the station. The inner walls of the corridor were flat fish tanks. Each section was filled with water, algae, and seaweed. The plants helped keep the station's air fresh and breathable. Geordi had read how the system worked with nature as much as possible. Heavy pressure doors divided the station into sectors. When they passed the third set, Geordi paused to examine them. Sensors were located throughout the station to detect sudden changes in air pressure or to report water in the corridors. If the hull started leaking, the doors sealed off that sector. Control panels beside the door overrode the automatic systems. That let repairmen get to the damaged hull. Halfway around the station, Leilani stopped. Painted across the door in dark blue letters was the sign, Science Department, Research 1. Leilani palmed the door's control pad. "Why don't the doors just open for us?" Lissa asked. She gave the control pad a suspicious look as she passed it. "I feel like a criminal or something. We shouldn't have to ask to get into the public areas." Before Geordi could say anything, Yoshi spoke. "Underwater station has many doors, Honorable Lissa. Station keeps doors closed for safety. If hull leaks, water will not go past closed door." "Thanks a bunch, Yoshi." Todd sounded tense. That gave Geordi something to think about. As they followed Leilani deeper into the station, Starfleet cadets were the best and the strongest in the Federation. And in spite of that, he was edgy about this field trip and about being in such a dangerous place. His classmates also seemed worried. Was there a reason they were nervous? Were they all sensing an impending disaster? Geordi snorted at his foolishness. It wasn't possible that everyone would make the same psychic prediction, he supposed, but it was very, very unlikely. That left only one explanation. Lieutenant Moldoff had analyzed their psychological profiles. When he assigned their mission, he had chosen a field trip that played on their hidden fears. That made sense to Geordi. Life in Starfleet meant dealing with the unknown. If you couldn't make your fears work for you, you'd never survive away team duty. Proper respect and a healthy dose of fear would keep you alert on an unexplored world. Figuring that out made Geordi feel better. He was used to dealing with alien worlds. His blindness, and later his visor, showed him a far different world than what people around him saw. For his classmates, this field trip was the first time they had dealt with that strangeness. Most of them, it seemed, were finding the experience a little unsettling. Nobody was born knowing how to handle alien environments. Even Starfleet cadets had to learn how to handle strange and possibly hostile situations. It was much better for them to learn that lesson now than to face it on an away team mission where lives depended on their actions. Geordi shook his head. How many lessons within lessons had Lieutenant Moldov put into this field trip? Clearly, their grades would be based on much more than the reports they had been assigned to write. Geordi almost ran into Yoshi when they stopped. Startled, he stepped back, running into Ven. Watch where you were going. Reacting to the unexpected impact, Ven pushed Geordi away. For someone of his slight build, the Andorian was amazingly strong. Geordi stumbled against the door frame. Somehow he snagged his visor on a projecting edge and knocked it loose. He grabbed for it and settled it back into place, shaking. For a few seconds, he couldn't make any sense of the visual inputs. He leaned against the wall, waiting for things to return to normal. He heard the door open, heard his classmates file past him into the lab. Are you all right? Leilani put her hand on his shoulder. Some of the tension left Geordi. He nodded. My visor isn't supposed to come loose like that, but once in a while, he shrugged. I guess nothing's perfect. Leilani felt along the door frame. There's a bump here, right where it would catch your visor. That figures. He wiggled the visor against its contact points. It feels a little loose, too. I wonder if the pressure of the atmosphere is affecting it. It's possible. Sometimes we have trouble with our equipment when it first comes down from the surface. Geordi checked the visor again. It's working fine now. I'll just have to avoid walking into walls for the rest of the day, he promised himself. In that case, let's join the others. Leilani grinned at him. I think you'll like this part. The room was small, barely large enough to hold the entire group. Counters were built into 3 of the room's 4 walls. Each workstation held a helmet and control gloves with monitor gauges and video screens on the wall. A short, dark-haired woman was talking to someone through her communicator as Geordi entered. She had her back to the door. That's right. We've got a student group here now. They'll be running Unit 5 for the next hour. Got it, answered a voice from the ceiling. We'll schedule the remote links for later this afternoon then. Brooks out. The woman turned around slowly. She was wearing a gray work suit and a metallic mesh vest that sparkled when she moved. Although she looked young, Geordi got the feeling she had worked here a long time. Welcome, she said with a smile. I'm always pleased to see Starfleet's latest group of cadets. Leilani moved to the front. This is Dr. Chris Hall. She's director of the telepresence studies done here. Please, nothing so formal, just Chris. Chris smiled and waved off the rest of the introduction. Geordi wondered if this act was staged for every group that visited the lab. Besides, we're just playing with the toys here. Leilani smiled back. It may be play, but these toys are the Federation's most advanced exploration tools. They allow us to study environments where it would be impossible to send a human. Chris laughed. You're stealing my lecture. But if you cadets don't learn anything else today, remember this. If your work doesn't seem like play, find something different. Life isn't long enough to spend years doing something you don't enjoy. She faced each cadet squarely for a moment. Light sparkled off the plates of her vest. It reminded Geordi of something very familiar. He frowned. What did that vest remind him of? Chris smiled again. End of lecture. Everyone, choose a station and we'll get to work. Geordi took the closest chair and examined his equipment. The gloves were easy. When he put them on, they transmitted his commands to a robot explorer somewhere on the ocean floor. The helmet, though, was a problem. It relayed visual information from the robot's cameras to the user's eyes. When properly adjusted, the helmet let its wearer see what the robot saw as it moved across the ocean floor. These helmets were standard issue. Geordi had tried to use them before. They wouldn't work with his visor. With a sigh of frustration, he pushed the equipment away. There's nothing he could do with that helmet. He couldn't complete this part of the assignment either. Geordi slumped in his chair. It wasn't fair. The harder he tried, the more things went wrong. How was he going to pass this class if he couldn't do any of the field trip projects? To make matters worse, Ven was sitting beside him. Chris had started on the far side of the room and was working her way toward him, helping the cadets adjust their helmets. Ven glanced toward Geordi. On an away team, You would endanger everyone because you cannot use the equipment. He can't use this model of helmet either, Geordi realized. The helmets were solid and fitted tightly over the head. They had no openings for the Andorian's sensitive antennae. How does your helmet fit? Geordi asked. It was a cheap shot. He was tired of Ven's comments. Ven didn't answer. For a moment, Geordi was sorry he'd said anything. Attacking Ven wouldn't solve his problems. He wished he knew what he was supposed to do, since he couldn't use the helmet. Chris dropped a pair of helmets on the counter between them. Why don't you two try these on? She asked. I think they'll work a little better than standard issue. Geordi glanced at the helmets. Ven's had an open framework. He could adjust the supports to fit his head and, more importantly, to avoid his antennae. The other helmet didn't look any different from the one Geordi already had. Ven grabbed his helmet and put it on. He swung the eye cups into place, adjusting them to fit. After tightening the straps, Ven slipped his hands into the control gloves. His fingers twitched as he picked up his robot and began exploring. What are you waiting for? Chris asked with a trace of laughter in her voice. I'll think you don't want to play with my toys. It's not that. Geordi turned the new helmet over in his hands. To his surprise, the internal wiring had been greatly altered. He wasn't sure what most of the parts did. It should work for you. Chris pointed to the contact points on either side of the helmet. I had the Academy's medical officer send down the specifications for your visor. Having equipment you can use is your right. I don't know. Geordi examined the helmet to cover his confusion. Because of the wide range of humanoid body shapes and physical abilities, every Federation citizen could have essential equipment altered to his or her personal requirements. Somehow, Geordi hadn't expected Starfleet to worry about its unique problems until after he graduated. It was my pleasure, Chris said. This finally gave me an excuse to see how they designed your visor. It's a wonderful piece of technology. Something in her voice struck a chord in Geordi. He had heard his visor called many things, but wonderful was not a term most people used. He turned to look at her. At close range, the tiny sensors on her vest were impossible to miss. Like the facets of an insect's compound eye, each sensor picked up part of the scene around her. Computer implants fed the information to her optic nerves, bypassing her damaged retinas. This let her see her surroundings better than a sighted person. Suddenly, Geordi remembered where he had heard of Chris Hall. Several years ago, while his parents were visiting the university on Albrecht 5, terrorists bombed the biochemistry research facilities. The resulting explosions and fire filled the nearby buildings with dense, poisonous smoke. Most of the scientists were overcome by chemical fumes. Rescuers, blinded by the thick smoke, could not find the victims. Without help, a graduate student named Chris Hall pulled 8 people from the marine biology lab before the rescue squad arrived. Geordi remembered the incident because, like him, Chris Hall was blind. You went to the university on Albrecht 5. Geordi hadn't realized he was going to say it until the words popped out. I remember hearing about what you did during that bombing. You heard about that? Small galaxy, she laughed. That was a long time ago. Try your helmet. Geordi removed his visor and put on the helmet. At first, he couldn't make the connections work. He adjusted the helmet several times before he got a solid contact. Even then, what he was seeing was nonsense. After a moment, he realized the problem was the difference between the two devices. The visor presented him with a broad range of data that he then interpreted. The telepresence helmet was connected to a robot with limited senses. The robot's sensors reported the most useful information about an extremely alien world. He'd have to rethink what he saw through the helmet. Have fun. Chris squeezed his shoulder briefly. Her footsteps whispered against the tile floor, moving away from him. He started to call her back, wanting to ask her more questions about the helmet. He didn't understand everything about how his visor worked. That made him doubly curious to learn how she had altered the helmet for him. Before he could say anything, his brain connected with the information coming through the helmet. Suddenly, Geordi was in an alien world. He was clinging to the side of a cliff, looking down on the strangest sight he had ever seen.